In this video, we are going to learn how to do validation in Express.js. Validation is very important because we want to be sure that the data being passed around in the application meets certain requirements. First, we are going to write validation from scratch and see how to wire things up. After that, we are going to use a validation library. There are different libraries out there that make it easier for us to do validation. We are going to use one of them. But what are we going to validate? What I have on the screen is from the previous lesson where we did CRUD operation with Postgres database. So I'm going to make use of it, but it doesn't matter if you have the same project. If you're interested in having the same exact thing, you can check the previous lesson. But even if you want to implement this in your own project or you want to start one from scratch, it's the same principle. So don't bother so much about this. Here I have some endpoints defined for to do CRUD operation. Endpoint for create, get all to dos, get a specific one, update and delete. Let's just pick only two of them for this demonstration. What I'm going to do is to validate the input when the user or when the client sends a request to create a to-do. Before I begin to write the code for validation, the first question I want to ask myself is, where should this code be? Where am I going to place the code? So what happens is that to create a to-do, the to-do should have a title and status. It means that we should handle validation before calling this create function. So let's say somewhere up here to have the validation. But the thing is that I don't want to have this route handler cluttered with validation logic. Another thing is, what if I want to reuse that validation logic elsewhere to check the payload for creating a to-do? So I'm not going to have the validation inside here. What I'm going to do is to have a different file and a different function that handles validation. Talking about the function, we have learned previously that most things that belong to Express are middleware. Even the validation logic we are going to write, we are going to make use of middleware. For the validation for to-dos, everything that relates to to-do, I'm going to create a folder here. Let me call it validation. Before I go further, let's understand the problem we are trying to solve. So I'm going to call the endpoint to create a to-do. I'm going to send off the request. Let me start the server first. Now the server is up and running. I'm going to send off the request to create a to-do. Something went wrong. What just happened? So what happened is that we are trying to insert a null value for to-do title. How is that possible? When I check this request, you can see that the client, the requester, did not send the title and did not send the status. But on our own side, we did not complain. We did not validate the incoming request. So this is on us. What I want to do now is to correct the mistake. Let me create a function to handle requests for create a to-do. So inside the validation folder, I'm going to call this create to-do validator.js. By the way, this folder, the file name, whatever, it's totally up to you. This is just how I want to do it. You can structure your project anyhow you see fit. So I'm going to have that function there. Then this function is going to be a middleware. Like I said before, most things express middleware. I'm going to export const create to do validator. Because this is a middleware, or to make it a middleware, we say request response next. Here I'm going to check. Let me have errors to be an empty array. What I want to do is to check if not request.body.title, because we require the title. I'm going to say errors.push title is required. Let me just do something similar for status. Status is required. And one last thing for status, I want the status to be for predefined values. What that means is if, or let me say else if, not that, if status is not equal to pending and status not equal to ongoing and the status not equal to done. If it is none of these, I want to say that status must be pending, ongoing, or done. This is just my own choosing. So finally, I want to check if errors.length is greater than 0. That means we have at least one of these validation constraints failing. What I want to do is to respond to the requester, to the client, with a 400 status code that is bad request, and I'm going to return here as well so that the function execution doesn't continue. I'm going to say return res.status bad request, and then let me just send the errors as JSON data. However, if the validation passes, what I'm going to do is to call this next function to hand off the request to the next middleware. So I'm going to send next, and that is just it. If I send off the request again, we're not going to get any different result because we have not applied the validation rule. How do we make use of this validator? It is so straightforward. I'm going to go back to the route handler for to do. So this is to do router. Then for the endpoint to create a to do, what I'm going to do is I'll just pass the middleware here. Remember when we talked about middleware, you can pass multiple middleware to a route handler. So this is a middleware. This final guy here is also a middleware. What we can actually do is, let's call this const create to do to be equal to that. So we can pass the guy there. So we can pass multiple middleware to a route handler. Now, if you're a purist and you want to separate concerns more or further, or to make this lean, straightforward like this, what I can do here is to have a controller. Let me call it to do controller.js. Then in that controller, I'm going to move, let me move this guy here, cut, and I'm going to move it over to the controller. Then export default create to do. Over here in the router, make sure to import to do controller and then create to do. So now we have our controller and we just have this guy for mapping the route and running the middleware. We can do something similar for get to do. That is the controller thing. I'm going to cut this guy here. Come on. Let me come inside here and have const find all to be equal to that. This should be async and find all. Back to the router, I can say this is to do controller.find all. This is going to work similar way like we had it before, but I think it is more readable now, right? One thing very important you need to understand is that the middlewares will be executed in the order you specify them. That means in this case, create to do validator is going to run before create to do. That is if the validation passes. If we move this create to do validator to the end, it means that we're already running this route handler from the controller before the create to do validator. And if I send off the request, we are going to get the same error like before because the validator did not run. Now let me return it back to the way it was. I think I got a different error there. Let me quickly see. To do repository. So the error is coming from here. I did not import my repository. I'm going to import in this file. Is there something else I'm missing? Not sure. Okay, so back to the router. This is still at the end. The validator is still the last middleware. If I send the request, I get the error like before. But if I go over here and apply the validator before the route function, we are going to see the difference. This time we get the validator working. So the user must supply the title, write code, and the status, whatever, and send the request again. You can see that the second validation rule for status kicks in because we said that the status must be pending, ongoing, or done. So let me change that to ongoing, and this time we created the to-do. What we have implemented is a very simple validation logic. Now imagine that you are building a real project with so many endpoints and so many things to validate. It might be tedious and maybe a little more difficult to manage if you have to write all the validation rules from scratch. This is where some libraries that help us to do validation comes in quite handy. For Node.js and Express, there are different options, that is validation libraries you can use. There is express-validator, there is Joy, etc. But for the purpose of this demonstration, let's implement a similar validation rule using Joy library. I'm not going to go into details about this library. I don't even know. I don't have all the details. But what we can do is to do a very basic validation with it. If you want to learn more about this library, you can check the official documentation at joy.dev. First, I need to install that library. So I'm going to run npm install JOI. Okay, it is installed. So let me follow the guideline here. I'm going to copy and paste. But before that, let me create a different file. I don't want to delete the manual one or this is still manual approach, by the way. So I'm going to call this file add to do.js, and then I'll follow the guidelines there. Say general use. I'm going to copy this guy. I'm going to paste it here. So inside here we can define the rules for the validation. I'm going to say title. Title is going to be a string, that is fine, and it is going to be required field. I will do something similar for status. Status is going to be a string. It is going to be valid if it is one of these: pending, ongoing, and done. Also, title is going to be required. So how do I check whether the validation passes? Okay, I can call this. So here I'm going to replace the hard-coded data with the request.body from the incoming request. If there's an error, we are going to have something in this error object. Otherwise, it is undefined. So like before, I'm going to say if there's if error, we return res, not that, the status, bad request code, and JSON. Just going to return the error data. Otherwise, I'm just going to say next. Oh, by the way, this is supposed to be a function. So export const add to do validator. All right. How do we make use of this? It is straightforward. This is just another middleware. Oh my gosh. I need request, response, and next. Just like before, I will go back to the repository. Let me remove this and replace with this one. Make sure to import that. I'm going to start the server again and give this a try. Hold on. Okay, so because of this import statement here, this guy here, because I opted into to use ES module instead of CommonJS, so I'm going to change that into import joy from joy. By the way, I don't like the name of this file. Let me change it to add to do validator. Nice. I'm going to make sure, okay, add to do validator. Everything looks okay now. All right, the server is up and running again. I'm going to do what I did before. First, I'm not going to send any data. You can see that we get the validation from the library working. It says that title is required. It has additional information, which is very helpful, by the way. And then I'm going to, for status, I'm going to put something random here. It says that status must be one of pending, ongoing, and done. Let me undo that and we create the request again. So we achieved a result that is similar to what we implemented without the library. The choice is yours if you want to write all the logic like this from scratch, or if you want to use a library. Alright guys, I believe this has given us at least some ideas how to go about implementing validation in our express.js application, and I hope you liked it. Until next time, enjoy coding.